Matthew 4, and here's where we're starting, verse 18. But before we get in, I just want to kind of remind you kind of where we've been, right? So Jesus, he has kind of been called out by John the Baptist, and he got baptized. Like, we had this kind of cool demonstration of Jesus where he's getting kind of put in the water, and he's kind of coming out, like, not a baptism of repentance for him, but kind of like basically being baptized on behalf of us in this really cool way. It's like, hey, actually, you're not going to be able to live this perfect life, but I'm going to live it in your place. And so Jesus' baptism is even for us. And then we actually see last week, right, where he's in Matthew 4, the beginning of this, he gets led by the Spirit up into the wilderness to actually face temptation from the devil on our behalf. Like, in the ways that we fail temptation all the time, Jesus faces those same temptations and is victorious in our place. And now what we're going to see is Jesus starts this ministry. He's going around, he's teaching people, he's healing. There's all kinds of really amazing stuff that's happening. But today I want to zoom in on verse 18, and this is where Jesus first calls his disciples. And so let's look at this together, just a few verses. It says this: while walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Now immediately they left their nets and followed him, and going on from there, he saw two brothers, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets, and he called them. And immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. So, pretty short little passage, right? But it's really this kind of first glimpse we have into Jesus kind of gathering up these followers as he begins this ministry. And one of the things that's interesting that Jesus does over and over and over again, and we're not just going to see it here, but we see it kind of through the whole, like the whole Gospel of Matthew, is Jesus is trying to clarify for people who are around him, what does it mean to follow him? And this actually has to do with our vision statement, right? Our vision statement at Treeline, we've kind of talked about this, but it's just cultivating authentic followers of Jesus. It's a really short vision statement, but it was interesting. Last week, we kind of met over at Huron Hills Church. We kind of ended up doing a last-minute outdoor service because it was super nice, and we were like, why not? So we did an outdoor service. It was great. And, you know, whenever you're, like, pushing a lot of sound through speakers outside, people come up and want to know what's going on. And this lady came up and was kind of talking to us about the church and was like, oh, this is a new church in town. Very cool. And she asked, what is the vision statement? And I said, well, it's pretty simple. It's just cultivating authentic followers of Jesus. And when I said that, she kind of, I could tell she didn't like it. You know, she was not happy about it. And so she kind of said, oh, what authentic? Like, what is that? Why do you say authentic? Do you mean that there's like real followers of Jesus and fake followers of Jesus? Or do you mean that you are like the real followers of Jesus and everyone else is a fraud? Are you kind of saying you are the only real Christians? And she was actually pretty ticked off. Like, it was like she didn't even really want to have much of a conversation. She kind of was just on her way. But I actually totally understood where she was coming from, right? Because there's a lot of people in the world that are kind of like this. And I think we all have this tendency to think like we are right about the way we think and everyone else is wrong. And so I was trying to kind of explain to her what we meant by this idea of cultivating authentic followers of Jesus, that it isn't some kind of injunction against kind of other churches or other Christians, but it's actually this acknowledgement that inside all of us, like myself first and foremost, is this desire to try to define myself, what it means to follow Jesus, instead of letting him define it for me. Like, that's not something I'm like, man, I see other people do this all the time. I'm like, no. I see myself do this all the time. Do you? I mean, is this something that it's just kind of happens where I'm actually trying to take Jesus and I'm trying to conform him into my own image instead of the other way around. I'm always trying to get Jesus to be about what I'm about instead of coming to him and figuring out what is he about. In other words, I spend a lot of my time trying to get Jesus to be a follower of me. Do you guys do that? I mean, I do that all the time. This is like my average week, is at least part of that week is I'm with Jesus and I'm like, hey, can we do this thing I'm trying to do together? Like, I've got plans, I've got vision, I've got this stuff I'm trying to get accomplished. Like, will you follow me in this? And so this vision statement is really like an indictment against myself and other Christians in this room of saying we have this tendency to try to make Jesus follow us, but we really do in our heart of hearts, we want to be authentic followers of Jesus. And so one of the things we're most serious about here is letting Jesus define for us what it means to follow him. So what does it mean to follow Jesus? Like if you were going to try to explain that to someone else, like if you're saying, hey, I'm a follower of Jesus, and they say, what does that mean that you're a follower of Jesus? How would you explain it? Well, I think it's an interesting question because following someone can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, right? And Jesus' ministry starts with a call to follow him. But it's interesting, it wasn't just a call to believe his teachings or to kind of follow some of his life principles, but it was a call to discipleship, right? And you've kind of heard this term before, right? It's like the 12 disciples, this word discipleship. It's not just a call to kind of attend his teachings or even apply his life principles, but discipleship involved like a whole life pursuit of someone. And that's how his ministry begins. He kind of calls these people into this relationship of disciples. But then at the very end, when Jesus is about to ascend into heaven after the cross, after the resurrection, he tells this same group of people, and he says, you go and make disciples. Like, I'm calling you to be a disciple, and I'm calling you to go into the world and make more disciples. And so whatever following Jesus is, it has to do with discipleship. And so I want to just look here because I think this is where this idea of discipleship starts. And I want to look at the call of discipleship. All right, the call of it. Now this is Jesus walking along the Sea of Galilee, and he sees two brothers, right? You've got Simon, who like the author of Matthew's like, hey, Simon, he kind of was, but people kind of, you know him as Peter, the Apostle Peter. So Simon, who's called Peter, and Andrew, and it says they were casting a net into the sea, which was a very normal thing for them to do because they were fishermen. And Jesus speaks to them, and this is what he says. He says, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And then you have this kind of second group. You have James and John. They're in the boat with their father, and it just says, and he called them. So it seems like it's like the same. He doesn't repeat it again, but it seems like it's the same call on their life. And I want us to just take note how this relationship starts, right? Because we're going to see these people through the whole rest of the gospel, this idea of a follower of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus. One of the things that's really interesting about this situation is it happens backwards from how it normally would. The normal pattern of the day of how you'd become someone's disciple is actually you would initiate that. You would approach a teacher or some kind of great person. You would say, hey, I want to be your disciple. Can I follow you in this way? You would make the request. But that's not how following Jesus works. You see, we don't initiate the relationship. Jesus does. And in this situation, only he can. And it's also worth noting that Jesus doesn't exactly extend an invitation to these people. Did you notice that? When he stands before them, he actually lays before them a command. He doesn't say, hey, if you want, or hey, here's an option for your life, or hey, here's an invitation I want to extend to you. He literally just says, follow me. He doesn't put them before them an opportunity should they want it. What Jesus does is he stands before these men and he uses his voice in an authoritative way to call them out of their current existence into another. And that's literally what happens. Like, look at the details that we give, that we're given. So that's the call, and now here's the response. Look at verse 20. If you got it in your Bible, just look how they respond. Verse 20. It says, immediately they left their nets and followed him. And so that's the first group, right? Like this first group immediately left their nets and followed him. And then verse 22, the second group that he called them as well, it says, immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Now, this is amazing to me. Like, I don't know if this is crazy to you, but this is crazy to me. These four men are the very first picture that we have given of what it means to follow Jesus. And the picture that we are given is of people who respond to the call of Jesus on their lives by leaving everything that previously defined them and literally going with Christ. It's a really powerful image, and we're even like meant to kind of picture that. Isn't even like they clean up their stuff, right? It's not even like they're like, hey, this is sweet. Let me like clean this up a little bit. I got some things I got to tend to before I start on this journey. Like you're literally meant to picture they're holding nets. Jesus says, follow me, and they drop them. It says they left their nets, and they left their father in the boat, and they follow Jesus. And they step forward into a completely new identity. And listen, it wasn't that these people never picked up their nets again, right? Like you'll see this later in the story. Like these are people who know how to fish. It's a skill set they have, and from time to time it comes into their story with Jesus. But we're meant to understand that this wasn't who they are anymore. There's this clean break from their old life, and following Jesus actually cost them the current life they were living, right? And so like Jesus' invitation to follow me, it wasn't an invitation that could coexist with who they currently were. It was actually this invitation, this call on their life to become something different. And I think that when a lot of us come across passages like this, where you see this with like the rich young ruler who comes to Jesus and says, hey, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And he says, hey, sell everything you have and follow me. Or you look at this and you see people who are like, hey, follow me. And it's like, you had to leave everything. You had to leave your dad in the boat, right? It's like, this is a costly thing. And we kind of look at sometimes these pictures of Christianity and we say, man, what a really radical or almost like Navy SEALs version of Christianity, right? It's like, there's everybody in the army, then there's like, this is the elite. Some people take Jesus very seriously. But I think we need to be careful about thinking this way about it, because this isn't something that Jesus introduces to us later in the story after you've got kind of thousands of followers, and Jesus is like, hey, for like the really devout among you, here's this kind of next step I want to throw your way. This is actually the very first picture that we're given of following Jesus. And it's actually kind of like the only picture we're given of following Jesus. Every picture is oriented from this one. And you see, it's interesting because Jesus was a real person who had a real ministry. And there were a number of ways that someone could consider themselves a follower of him. And you could have been someone who was healed by Jesus. Like you could have been, one of those like guys who's like, friends rip the roof off a house and like shove you down like in this room because you're like, I'm disabled, I need some help. Like, Jesus, I need to be healed. And you might be like, I'm a huge fan. Like, Jesus healed me. It was incredible. Or you could even be someone who's like, I regularly attend his teachings. You like hit subscribe, like I'm not even hit subscribe. I'm like a Patreon supporter. Like, I love this guy. Everything that he has to say, I have followed. I've listened to everything. I am truly a follower of Jesus. There's a lot of different ways you can follow people. But when Jesus talks about following him, he's talking about a very specific kind of relationship. It's discipleship. Because see, every teacher had fans, and every teacher had subscribers, people who wear their merch. But the invitation that Jesus gave to these people was really crazy because he was inviting them not to just attend his stuff, that he was inviting them to become part of his inner circle. Like, I mean, it's like he literally was like, come follow me. And they're like, where? Everywhere. Everywhere. Everywhere I go, I want you to be there with me. I want you to be part of my entourage. I want you to do what I do. I want you to go where I go. I want every single pattern of my life to become a pattern of your life. I don't want you to just learn from the things I say. I want you to learn from the way of life because you're going to be with me side by side every single place that I go. And there were some ways to be a follower of someone where you didn't have to actually give up that much of your previous life. But discipleship, it necessarily involved leaving everything behind because Jesus called to follow him. It wasn't abstract. It wasn't an idea. It was literal. He was standing on the shore, and pretty soon he was going to walk away. And the question is, are you going to follow him? And it wasn't like nobody who was there that day and they heard Jesus say like, hey, Peter, follow me. Nobody was wondering, I wonder if he is doing this or not. The question was just, did Peter follow or not? Like, Jesus walks away. Like, did Peter get out of the boat and go and follow Jesus or not? It had like actual content. He had literally had to walk away from his previous life to now be defined by Jesus and Jesus alone. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he's not alive anymore, but he used to be a pastor. And this is what he says about this. It's kind of amazing. He says, the first step which follows the call, this very first step, as Jesus says, follow me, the very first step you take in Christianity, he says, this first step cuts the disciple off from his previous existence. This call to follow, it at once produces a new situation. To stay in the old situation makes discipleship impossible. Peter must leave his nets in order to follow Jesus. And this is what he says. He says, one would have thought nothing so drastic would ever be necessary at such an early stage. This is the very first thing Jesus tells him to do. But since he is the Christ, he must make it clear from the start that his word is not just an abstract doctrine, but it is the recreation of the whole life of man. He says quite literally, the only right and proper way is to go with Jesus. The call to follow implies that there is only one way of believing on Jesus Christ, and that is by leaving all and going with the incarnate Son of God. In the Gospels, the very first step a man must take, or a woman must take, in following Jesus is an act which radically affects his whole existence. It's kind of crazy. That's the call. Follow me. But look at the content, because Jesus actually says, like, what's going to happen if you do this. He says, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. This is like the call of discipleship. This is the content of discipleship. You see, the reason that following Jesus involved like leaving your net, leaving your boat, leaving your old way of life is because Jesus actually has a new mission and vision for your life, right? He's like, no, I actually have something I'm trying to give you, and you can't come with anything else in your hands. And when Jesus met these men, they were mending their nets, and it says they were doing that. They're fixing their nets, they're casting their nets, and they were doing that for they were fishermen, okay? So they were doing something because they were something. And that is true of everyone, right? That's like everybody is doing something because they are something. You could be like, I'm selling houses because I'm a realtor. Or you could be like, I am stealing things because I am a criminal, right? Like you're doing something because you are something. And Jesus' intention with you when he calls you to follow him is to change both those things, who you are and what you do. He's saying it used to be about catching fish because you were a fisherman, but now I want you to be catching people because you are a follower of Jesus. And I came for the redemption and salvation of people. You see, Jesus isn't just like a doctrine. He isn't just a set of truth statements that you're supposed to just believe in. He is a person. He's alive. He's someone that actually calls us to follow him, not just think rightly about him. And because Jesus actually has a mission and vision for the world, it means he also has a specific mission and vision for your life. And you don't even have to be confused about what that might be. He says it. He says, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Have you ever wondered why Jesus chose fishermen? Right? It wasn't just like before time began, he was like, I am going to insert into my story an amazing dad joke, right? It's not like he was like, you are fishermen, but you'll be fishers of men. Right? Like that's not the point. Like, and it's not even like this was some of Jesus' like clever strategy either. Like, dude, these people are amazing at catching fish. Like, if I could just get them to catch people, man, we would really be rolling, right? Like, it's not that either. Like, these people really weren't bringing that much to the table. Like, they weren't. And you know, and they're not even like, they don't even have good nets. Like, they're mending them, right? Like, their fishing stuff isn't even going that well. They're like, I've got to fix this thing. Like, they're kind of in this difficult place in life. And they were really young men, likely late teenagers at best. But what's interesting is even being like late teens, they were still too old to actually become disciples. Like everyone that was like the best and brightest of their class, they would have started this discipleship process years ago. And so these are men who've been passed by for like serious spiritual things. And they're just working like a fairly normal, hard labor job. And so you just have to know, Jesus didn't go after these like high competence elite people. He's just like walking through life. And he's like, this person looks pretty normal. Like very normal. You follow me. It's like the kind of people you see when you're going for a walk down by the docks. And I think that one of the reasons Jesus chose these men was to demonstrate to like all of us who would come after that anyone can be used by Jesus to do great things in the world. Like anyone. I mean, I'm so amazed by this because if you think about what happened to these men and what has happened after that, like we are in Ann Arbor, Michigan. You know how far away this is from Palestine? Like really far away. It's like thousands of years later, like all the way across an ocean, and we are here talking about Jesus, and we're talking about him because these men were given this task of telling the world about Jesus. And they did, and the entire world has never been the same. Jesus used these people to change the world. I'm stunned by it. Like, I'm literally just amazed by it. Like, they were literally fixing fishing nets. That's what they were doing. And then Jesus walks up on them and says, follow me. And you're like, I wonder what's going to happen. And they just said yes to Jesus. They just said yes, not just with their mouth, but they said yes with their lives. And they left what they were doing, and they just followed Jesus. And he used them to not just change the world, but to change all of eternity forever. What's the vision you have for your life today? Like, what are you doing with your life? What's your dream? What's your 10-year plan? What's your 50-year plan? What's the vision that you have for your life? You see, the reason that Jesus could use people like this to change the world, it wasn't just because they had like this hidden potential that no one else saw, right? It wasn't that Jesus was like, hey, everyone thinks you're fishermen, but I know there's like this hidden beauty in you that only I can see. That wasn't actually what was going on. The reason that Jesus could choose even people like this was because of what Jesus came into the world to do. You see, Jesus isn't like other spiritual teachers. He's not like other religious leaders. Jesus didn't come with like a new 10 commandments that he's like, hey, the old ones, they were kind of okay. They worked pretty well, but like my new set is going to get you where you want to go, right? It's like he didn't come in this way of like, I got this new way of life. I got these new rules, this new system. And if you follow this really well and even get other people to follow this, like things are going to go really well for you. You see, when Jesus calls people to follow them and when he called these men to follow him, over time, he keeps dropping these breadcrumbs and helping them understand where he's actually leading them. And you know where the story takes you, right? Jesus is like, I'm trying to lead you to the foot of a cross that I'm going to be on. And even as followers of Jesus, like this whole thing of like, I want to make you fishers of men, like you're not somebody who's going out into the world and trying to convince people to follow these rules or try to like shape your life in this way. We're literally, Jesus is saying, hey, be a fisher of men. Grab people out in the world and bring them with you to a very specific place, and it's the foot of the cross. Because on the cross, Jesus Christ is doing something that no other religious leader, no other picture of God has ever done, and it's literally to pay for the sins of his followers. And it's literally what happens. Like, and it's crazy because none of his followers want him to go there. Like, they don't understand like what Jesus is even here to do. But he's like, follow me, and this is what's going to happen. You follow me is basically you coming to this place where I'm going to be up on that tree, and I'm going to be one who is crucified. And if you would let me, I'll take your sins. He's like, that's the call of following Jesus. Jesus doesn't actually say, hey, follow me and you take on my patterns and it's going to change your life. No, he says, hey, follow me to the cross. And in this place, I am calling you, I am commanding you, give me your sins. Give me your failures. Give me your flaws. Give me everything broken and distorted about your life and your past and your future. Give all of that to me and I will pay for it on this tree. And I will give you my life. I will give you my righteousness. I will give you my perfect, spotless record. I will give you my relationship with my Father. I will give you my heaven. I will literally pull you out of the story you are in, and I will place you in the position that only I could possibly have or earn or deserve. I want you to have that story if you will but trade places with me. You see, when Jesus calls someone to follow him, he's literally pulling them from darkness into light, from death to life. And his intention is not just that you would stay there, but his intention that you would be someone who has now tasted that is actually go back out into the darkness, grab more people who are there, and say, you have to come meet my Jesus. He's incredible. He's changed everything about my life. You need to follow me, and you don't bring them to a set of rules. You bring them to the foot of the cross, and you point at the man on the tree, and you say, this man wants to trade places with you like he traded places with me. And that thing, that being a fisher of men, that bringing people to the foot of the cross and pointing to Jesus, the very first thing Jesus defines about following him is he's saying, that's not just supposed to be like one of the things you sometimes do. He's saying that thing is meant to define you. It's the central thing your life is now about as a follower of Jesus. Follow me, I will make you a fisher of men. That will now be what you do because it's who you are. And it's not just for them, right? Those are the very first things he says. But look at the very last thing Jesus says as he's going up to heaven. He says, Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth are given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Go, do this. Like, this is the plan. This is the whole point. I will make you a fisher of men. Last words, go therefore and make disciples, not just followers, not just kind of fans, not just people who know what I've taught, but make people disciples. Is this what your life is about? Is this what your life's about? I mean, I'm telling you, for so many years of my life, this was not what my life was about. Like, I knew things about Jesus, but I wasn't that kind of follower. My whole life was about telling people about Jesus. And you know, everyone in the room, like, we're people who are wanting to follow Jesus. We really want to, but none of us are there, right? If you look at my last week, man, I spent a lot of time, like, installing windows in my house, and it was really hard. And there's like, it's not like every single thing you do every moment of the day is like, I'm telling someone about Jesus right this moment. But what Jesus is saying, he's saying, I want that to be like the substance, though. I want it to be like the thing that drives you, is like, I want more people to know Jesus because he's changed my life. And one of the things I've been struck by this is when I've always read this text, I've always been kind of amazed that these people did just like gave up their lives and followed Jesus with almost no content, right? They didn't even know where he was leading them. They didn't even really know who he was at this point. They just decided to follow him. But the thing I've been struck by this week is that Jesus actually called these men to follow him. And I was thinking about that. Like, you think about the end of their life, not just like the end of their life on earth, but I mean like in heaven, like tens of thousands of years from now, like they're going to look back over their story and look back to this moment and be like, there was a moment where I was a fisherman. I was trying to catch fish. And Jesus Christ called me to live a totally different existence. And I didn't even know what it was going to mean. I was kind of even like nervous about it. But I followed him. And he didn't just change my life, but he changed the world through me. I was thinking about that, and I was like, what an unbelievable honor that Jesus bestowed on these men. Man, like when Jesus comes to you and he says, follow me, like I think sometimes like we can look at the cost that we have to pay to follow Jesus, because you're like, you actually have to leave your old life behind to follow Jesus. You can't actually keep your big dreams. Like those actually have to die so that Jesus can give you this new dream and vision for your life. And I think sometimes we can focus on like, it's really hard to give up that thing to grab a hold of Jesus. But do you realize the honor that he bestowed on these men? And what's so cool is he's actually calling you to do the exact same thing. And I want to just let you just picture yourself in that scene, right? It's like you're going about your life, you're muddling around and just all kinds of stuff. Maybe your life is really frustrating. Maybe your nets are like super broken right now. You're like mending them. You're like, I can't even get where I'm trying to get. Like I'm just trying to fix my car, you know, like you're just, life's hard, it's frustrating, there's all kinds of things that are not going well. And then Jesus just like comes to you. He's like walking along the shore into your story, and you see him, and you see that Jesus is walking like directly towards you. Like he's not looking at anyone else, he's looking directly at you. And he calls you to follow him. And he's calling you to like step forth from who you currently are, what you've made your life about, and make it about him. And I just want you to know, like, no matter who you are in the room, like today, the King of the universe is calling you to do that. Like the King of the universe is calling you into his story. And you have to understand, like, there is no call on your life that could possibly be more valuable or glorious than this. Like there's nothing that could possibly be bestowed on the life of a human being that you would be less worthy of than that call of Christ to follow him. And yet the living Christ stands before each and every one of us today, and this is exactly his call in our lives. Not to just believe his teachings, not to just be a fan, but he's literally saying, I want you to be in my inner circle. I want you to be with me everywhere. I don't want just you to identify with me. I want to identify with you. Follow me. Listen, if you're in the room and you are new to Christianity, I want you to just know there isn't actually a question, what is the call of your life? That's not even, it's not a question actually. Like there isn't a question like what adventure or what story might I be called to in my life? I'm telling you, it is this. It is this. This call on your life, it eclipses all others. And the question is not what you will be called into. The question is whether you will step forth into this life your Creator has designed for you to step forth into, or whether you will shrink back and stay in the boat. What will you do? And you know, it's so interesting because following Jesus, I think a lot of us, we put that like, decision back in the rearview mirror, right? Like, well, I decided to follow Jesus. But what's so interesting about a Jesus who is real and alive is following him isn't just something you decide to do. One, it's the thing you need to do every day. Because every single day, Jesus is alive and he is doing things. And so the question isn't, did you decide to follow Jesus way back when? The question is, do you decide to follow Jesus today? Have you decided to follow Jesus this morning? Have you decided to follow Jesus today and tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that? Because Jesus is alive and he is going places and doing things, and he has a very specific vision and mission for your life. Have you decided to follow him? Let's pray.